We are ready to create our first React Native app, and I'll show you how to do that using the Expo platform, which will allow you to follow this course on any operating system, including Windows, if that's what you're using. You can actually build simple React Native apps right in your browser using the Expo Snack tool, which gives you an in-browser editor complete with a file tree and syntax highlighting, and the tool is integrated with other Expo tools like the iOS and Android preview. So here is how this example is going to look on iOS. Tap to play, and you get the preview right here. This iOS preview is the code that's here. You can test things out by changing the text here, for example. Hello, Expo Snack. And there you go. You change something, the preview will auto refresh. And you can even install JavaScript modules from NPM and use them here as well. Also, you can develop your React Native applications here and test them on your own devices. All you need to do is download the Expo Client mobile app on your phone, which is available on both iOS and Android. And then you just scan this QR code to launch this example app on your phone. How cool is that? If you're on a Windows machine, this is probably the easiest option for you to follow this course. If you want to take things one level up, you can run an Expo project locally using the Expo CLI node package. And this is something you can npm install -g for global expo -cli. So this is the same command you would use on your Windows-based node installation as well. And then to create an Expo React Native project, you use the command expo init, and then give it the name of the project, which will also be the name of the folder created in the working directory. Let's name this project Hello Expo. So the command will ask you what kind of workflow would you like for your project, and you have some options here. This is mostly to pick either regular or TypeScript flows and whether you need a managed workflow or not. So let's pick the managed blank workflow, and it's currently installing all the dependencies for this project. So this will take some time. When it's done, as you see in instructions here, we can just cd into the newly created directory, and to run things, we do npm start. And once the project is started, it will open up this screen, which has useful shortcuts to run the applications either directly in simulators or on your own device as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run on an iOS simulator. So as you can see, this opened up an iPhone simulator, and it will take some time to load up. And you should get the Open in Expo dialog here. And you're seeing the logs here, how it's bundling. And when it's done, you'll get the application with this Command D menu. And this here is the default screen for the Expo app. So let me go back to the terminal here, and I'm going to open up a new tab on this, and then launch your code editor here. I use VS Code, so we'll open up VS Code in here. And the entry point here is app.js. And this one will have the text that you see on the screen. So we can change that and save, and it should be auto-refreshed in your simulator. You can also test this application in a web browser. And this will open up the same application, and it's also connected to the VS Code that we have here. We save, and it will auto-reload. To use React Native for iOS without Expo, you can use this command, npx react-native init, and then the name of your applications. And I'm not running this command yet. This command will download a temporary copy of the React Native CLI and then use it to initialize a React Native project. However, since we're going to be using the React Native command many times, let's just install it permanently with npm install-global react-native. The only downside to this method is that when React Native releases a new version, you need to update this local copy of the CLI if you want to use the new version, while the npx way will always use the latest available released version, but download it every time. When this package is installed, it will make the React Native command available globally like this. So let's go ahead and use it. We do react-native init, the name of the project. So we'll do hello rn here. And this command is going to take some time. It does a few things. Just like Expo, it'll create a directory on this level with the same name that we passed to it. And it will then install the packages required for React Native to work. When the command is done, it will give you some instructions on how to run the application for both iOS and Android. We'll test it for iOS first, and then we'll do Android. So you can run it for iOS either directly using the React Native command run iOS, or you can open it up in Xcode and run it from Xcode as well. So let me go to hello rn and run the React Native run iOS command. So this will launch up the iPhone simulator. And once it's done building, it will run the React Native application directly on the simulator without an Expo client. At some point while this project is building, it will open up another terminal for the Metro bundler, and then it will launch the application on the simulator. And this is the screen that you get, which you can edit in the project. So in here, let's open up a code editor on this directory. And the entry point again is app.js. And as you can see, the default application comes fully configured with things like ESLint, Prettier, Babel, Metro Bundler, and Flow as well, which is a static type checker, just like TypeScript. This part here is the type of the app function. And let me just remove it in here. We won't be covering Flow or TypeScript in this course, but they add great value to any project. Once you get comfortable with React Native's components and APIs, take a look at either Flow or TypeScript and learn about what they bring to the table. And this is all the code that you see on the screen here. So you can change anything in here, and just like Expo, things will auto refresh. So here's step 1 that you see on the screen. So we can change things and save, and it should be auto refreshed in here. And there is also a command D screen. D is for debug. This is the debug menu in React Native. Or if you're testing on an actual device, you can just shake the device to open it up. So this is the debug menu, which has a few handy things here. You can, for example, disable the fast refresh that happens on save. And if you do that, then you'll need to reload every time you save. You can change the configuration for the bundler. And the inspector is handy as well. This allows you to inspect a few things. For example, here you can inspect elements. You can just tap on an element to see what is going on with that element. You can see its box model. You can see some of it as styles. And this inspector display is permanent. So when you're done with it, you can hide it again. But the more important line here is really the debug line. If you click it, React Native will open up your browser DevTools. And you can do a few things here. You can, for example, reload the app from here if you need to. And of course, you can do everything that developer tools allow you to do. For example, we can just come in here and console log a message and save. And this message will show up in the open developer tools. So it's probably a very good idea to always be in this mode and always keep your eye on the developer tools as you're building your application. And you can use Command R to reload this application. And this is a regular iPhone application. You can, for example, kill it with a swipe up, just like you kill any other application. And you see it on the screen right now. You can click it to run it again. And down here, there are some cool links to learn the basics of React Native. These are links to the official React Native documentations. For example, if we click on styles, it will open up the styles section of the React Native documentation in here. Let's explore the directory structure here a little bit further, starting with package.json. And you can see right here to run the project for Android, the command is react-native run Android. And this will launch up the Android emulator and run the Metro bundler again for Android. And when Metro is done bundling, the emulator will load the same application that we're working with. So again, we can come in here and change anything we want. Let me change this back to 1 spelled out, and it will auto reload in Android as well. And I want you to notice one thing. The debug instructions here are different. So in here, you press Command or Control M to get to the debug menu, and you can open up the debugger and you'll see the same console log message as well. The interesting thing is that if you remember the instructions on iOS, or to press Command D. And the same application rendered a different message for the Android application. And I want to point your attention to that. So this would be in the debug instruction component, which is coming from React Native libraries. Now, what I'm going to do is I'll go to this place under Node modules and find this debug instructions component. So here is the React Native package, and we need libraries, and we need the new app screen, and under components, we'll find the debug instructions component. And here is the part that I'd like you to notice. This component is written using the platform select method. So platform is something that you also import from React Native. And its select method, you give it an object with iOS, and you can also use Android, or you can use the default, which will work for Android in this case. So what this does is it will detect the platform and use the properties here to decide which value to use for that platform. So on iOS, it will use this component, and on Android and all the other platforms, it will use this different component that has different instructions. So this is one way to do something differently for iOS and Android. Another platform customization that we can do is using the file name itself. So if we rename app.js to app.ios.js, and if we duplicate this file and make another copy, app.android.js, then what React Native is going to do is that it will use app.android.js for the Android platform and use the app.ios.js for the iOS platform. So for example, let's remove the header here in app.android.js and save. And you'll notice that the header is gone in here. But if we run the same application on iOS, the header will still be there because it's in app.ios.js. Let's actually test that. React Native run iOS. The simulator is running, and as you can see, the header is still there, while it is not there in the Android build because it's using a different file here. So this is one other strategy to have different components for different platforms, but the code usually can be mostly shared between platforms, and you would use something like platform select to just customize a small part of the code. And you can also use the platform.select to customize the styling of your component, which is often necessary because the layout of Android and iOS are different. So I'm going to delete the Android file and go back to a regular just one file in here. So you can actually keep both simulators open and test your changes in both simulator at once. And this is especially easy on the Expo platform as well. But in this course, I'm going to test everything on iOS and test things on Android after we're done with major milestones. In the next video, we'll get a basic introduction on using styles with React Native. Let's talk briefly about using CSS with React Native, which is a bit different than what we're used to on the web. While React itself does not have any restrictions on how to use CSS, React Native enforces a standardized approach for styling. You can't use all CSS properties in React Native projects. You can only use the subset that is supported by React Native, which relies mostly on Flexbox for layout and focus on simplicity overall. When we write CSS for a web project, we have to deal with how CSS support varies among different browsers. This is not an issue with React Native CSS subset, although sometimes you'll need to conditionally use or not use a CSS property based on the platform, or give that property different values based on the platform. Since React Native is just a JavaScript framework without a browser that can parse CSS, React Native's way to use CSS properties is using the JavaScript API. This means using JavaScript objects instead of CSS strings. And just like using JavaScript to represent HTML, using JavaScript to represent CSS allows for a much richer experience and greater control. This CSS in JavaScript thing is supported in React itself, but React Native requires it and enhances it. So let's work through some examples, but before we do that, let me simplify this example here. So let me clean up the component, and let's just keep one view component and one text component, and let's remove everything else. And we can save to format. This is prettier that just auto formatted this component for me. And to have it integrated in your editor, you would install an extension. So I have the Prettier Code extension here for VS Code. And then you would configure your editor to auto format when you save. And you can also see how ESLint is working and given us warnings that we now have unused variables. So we can clean these variables as well and auto format. I'm going to actually delete all of these new screen components and not use them. For the styles properties here, we only need the section container and the section title. Everything else is gone. And in here, we don't have colors anymore. So let's just remove this and keep it default. So a few things to notice right away. There is a margin top. If we don't have this margin top, then the text would overlap with the controls that the iPhone here is using. So this is something that you would need to take care of. First, give it some margin. I usually do 40 in here. And there's also some horizontal padding in here. Now notice how padding horizontal is not something standard in CSS properties. This is an example of a CSS property that's part of React Native enhancements to this styling. And there are other enhancements that are React related. For example, you can give the styles property an array of values. We can, for example, add an object here and say something like, make the color red. This means first apply the section title style object, then apply this other object to set the color to red. And because the color red style came last, it will override any color styling that may come before it. So if section title here had a color blue property, the color red object will override that because it was included after the section title object. You'll notice how ESLint is immediately complaining that this is an inline style, and it is recommended that you don't use inline styles and that you would use a styles object created through the stylesheet.create method. So let me tell you why. If you make a typo in here and you save, you get a clear exception in here that you are trying to use an invalid style property. So that's a good signal. While if you make a typo in this object, the application will render correctly with just a warning that you're using an invalid style key. So that's one of the differences, how using a stylesheet.create based object is a little bit more strict and more clear in its dealing with CSS properties. All right, so let me get rid of this extra object here and just keep step 1 as a blue text and just keep one item in this array. You can get rid of the array, but I'm going to keep it here for the next example. And in fact, let's go back to having step 2 and step 3 so that we learn about the flex layout. And let me rename this. The React Native repository on GitHub under the Facebook organization here has a few really good reference examples and packages that you should explore. But let me point your attention to one particular package that is very helpful. And you can find that under packages here. And I'm talking about this RN tester package. This package is basically a demo of all the available React Native views and modules. Let me show you. There are some instructions here that you can do. Basically, we clone the React Native repo, all of it. So we just paste the same command to clone the React Native repo. Then we go into the new created directory and run npm install in here. And then we need to run npm start here. And keep this running in a terminal. And from another terminal, let's go into packages, then rn tester, and in here we run npm install as well, and we can follow the directions here to install the bundler gem, and then we use the bundler gem to install the dependencies of this project. So we need to gem install bundler, and I need to sudo this command, and then once bundler is installed, we run the bundle install and pod install commands. When the pod installation is complete, take a look at what's in this directory, and there is an XC workspace file. This is the file that we need to open in Xcode. So we can just do open and that file. And to run the RN tester project, we can just click the run button here. And it will launch this RN tester project in the simulator. And let me go ahead and open up my code editor on this directory. You are going to love this RN tester project. It has many examples of a lot of things that you can do with React Native. You can explore how these examples look in iPhone, and you can also run the same project in Android and see how things are different in Android. You can also explore the source code of all these components and APIs. So let's explore some of the UI components that are presented here in the RN tester project. Let's take a look at button. And in here, you'll see multiple examples of how to use the button component in React Native and how to customize its color and layout and how to make it disabled. And you can press those to see the action that they do, which is calling the React Native Alert API. And all of these examples are available right here in the source code. So you can do a file search here and look for button, and you'll see this button example right here. And in here, you'll see the 4 examples that are presented in the RN Tester UI app. So here is the onButton press function that just uses the alert API, which we are importing from React Native. And you'll see the 4 examples here in an exported array, and every one of them has a render function returning the component example here. So this is the simple button example that we see in here. If you need to adjust the color of a button, you can just pass the color property here. If you want to disable the button, we can just pass the disabled attribute. So these are very simple to follow examples, and there are so many of them. So let's explore some more. The one UI element that probably exists in every React Native application is the view element. So search for view, and you'll see a few examples here. And what I'm looking for is this one, the basic building block of all UI. So this screen here gives you a lot of examples on how to use the view element. This view element is often compared to the div element in HTML. Let's take a look at its source code. So look for view example. And the source code of this example is mostly about styling view elements. You'll see a lot of examples on how to style the view element differently. Another important UI element here is the text element. So unlike HTML on the web, you can't actually have free form of text with the React Native application. You have to wrap any text with a text React Native element. And another element example is the image element. And in here, you'll see examples of how to use the image element and all the attributes that you can use with it and how to style it. So take a look at all these examples and explore their source code and get yourself familiar with the way they are used in React Native. One thing you'll notice is that there are some components that are platform specific, like for example, Date Picker iOS in here. If you search for iOS, you'll see all